Adjunct Associate Professor Andy Johnson is a professor at the University of Canberra and has spent more than 43 years with the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service. Andy has conducted training in areas of maritime enforcement, risk management, intelligence, investigations, border protection and operational management in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, the Pacific and Australia. Andy holds a master's degree in maritime studies and is also a visiting fellow to the University of Wollongong and the University of Sri Jayewardenepura in Sri Lanka. I hope I said that right. Andy convenes and lectures in both postgraduate and undergraduate CCES courses, and he's also the author of the CCES Postgraduate Unit Maritime Enforcement. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Andy to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Lily, for your kind words, and hello to everybody. I hope all is well with you all and you're enjoying the Olympics in particular. I hope your countries are doing well. We had the opportunity this afternoon to have a cup of coffee with one of our students from the Caribbean, Deidria, who's from Jamaica. And of course their star sprinter, Usain Bolt, is doing very well there, and we regret greatly that he's not with our country actually. Look, we'll talk about border control. It's a very big subject. It has many, many topics and issues, and most of them, of course, are contemporary. And we'll look at some of the issues that we teach here, but there's many different modes in which we teach it, and I'll discuss that at the end. So what we'll cover is just an example of one mode and some of the subject matter that we cover in this unit of border control. So it is largely introductory, but there are further opportunities to go into greater depth through certificate and diploma courses, of course master's degree, and I see from the list of attendees tonight we have a number of our students and former students online, which is good. Good to have you on board. And right through to PhDs, we have a number of students who've come through the process of doing PhDs with us at the moment as well. So what we aim to do is to cover topical and relevant border control issues. Now they vary of course greatly depending on your country and your environment, and we'll speak at the end of the presentation about tailoring it to individual agencies and countries' environments. But we do address it as it relates to international and domestic legal issues. And quite often, of course, the international law will flavour and influence heavily the domestic law. And with border control, there is quite an element of enforcement. And we always teach, of course, that prosecution in these issues takes place in domestic courts. So really, domestic law becomes very, very important. And we also discuss policy, and we discuss procedure. And this type of subject, of course, you know, particularly when you're talking about illicit drugs or people smuggling or illegal fishing, whatever the case may be, they're very practical issues, and so they do relate to and are assisted by teaching that includes many case studies, a lot of photographic evidence, a lot of video evidence, and we have a large bank of experience and that type of material available. We cover extensively the global context as well as an Australian approach for those who are interested, and we do comparative case studies, of course, and benchmarking, which is often of interest. And we'll talk about that a little more as we go through. I mentioned that this is a foundation course, and it does form part of a World Customs Organisation accredited training. And it is that foundation that does lead into those grad certificates and diplomas, etc., masters, as we mentioned. So the feedback that we have is that a number of our students have found it quite stimulating, in that the format is interesting in that we would run, for instance, as an undergraduate course here, a dozen or so different topics through the duration of the unit. We have a bank of around 30. And of course we haven't got time to discuss these tonight or today, but what we will do is give you an example of some of the issues that we do cover. I've had a look at, we did invite you of course to supply questions, and appreciate the input that some have supplied with some of the questions. They're very interesting. Some of them are of course quite detailed and would take a significant amount of time to answer. So we'll have a look at some when we're finished, the formal presentation, and answer what we can, but it'll be a time restriction sort of thing as we go through. All right, so we'll start off, and we'll just do a brief introductory sort of situation by telling you about the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies, those of you that aren't familiar. We're centred, of course, in Canberra in Australia, and we provide consultancy and academic training availability in vocational courses, often 1 to 2 weeks, specific subject matter that agencies or countries need to be covered. An undergraduate unit, and that's what I'll talk about tonight, and of course postgraduate studies as mentioned through to masters, etc. The undergraduate program is convened by myself, and the lectures in the undergraduate format are 2 hours a week and for a semester, and 1 hour for a tutorial where practical issues are discussed and debated. But this, of course, is presentation can be made available in workshop format, if you like, vocational short courses and the others that we've mentioned. The lecturers, many of the lecturers have 30 plus years border control and border management experience, and are particularly involved in the field experience, and have actual operational experience in a variety of modes. And there are a number of ways of presenting it, as mentioned, but the Moodle system that the University of Canberra uses is one way that it can be completed, both a mixture of online or face-to-face. So basically, without going into great depth, because it is a huge subject, border control to me, and you will see the slide in front of you, really revolves largely around 2 areas. One is revenue management and the other is community protection. And across those areas, of course, we have security, supply chain security, which of course has become a much larger issue since September 2001. And of course the trade facilitation aspect is particularly important as well, and we'll discuss that balance between having the security role and having the facilitation role that industry requires to conduct their business efficiently. And amongst all that, of course, is industry support and assistance. Revenue management is a primary consideration for many countries, particularly some developing countries who have 50% plus of their revenue coming from customs. And of course all countries are particularly concerned about community protection, those issues like illegal immigration and illicit drugs and illegal fishing and importation of pornography, quarantine issues, firearms, etc. So we'll cover some of those over the coming minutes when we identify each of the units, and I think it may well answer some of the questions that have come up in the early instances. So as an example, one of the first issues that we'll cover will be the context, but first I present this photo with the inscription of it, the issue, and this was a photo I took not too long ago in a foreign country, and it was quite interesting. I was watching this vessel, a foreign registered vessel at anchor, and there were people coming to and fro in all different modes of transport, in dugouts and in little motorboats and speedboats and then larger boats, and some people were putting things on the vessel and some people were taking things off, and there seemed to be people getting on the vessel and other people getting off. And of course the question is there a problem with that? And I think many from a border control aspect would consider that it is a problem. Are these people authorised to approach and link up with this foreign registered vessel? Are there any risks involved? What are those risks? And of course then the answer is, what is the treatment to those risks? So there's some of the issues that we'll be having a look at as we talk about the different subject aspects as we go through. Okay, so the first topic that and I'll only spend a minute or two on each of these, but this is just an example. This is a dozen or so of the topics, and as I mentioned, we have a pool, much larger pool, and there are many that, such as money laundering and intellectual property rights, etc., that I haven't covered here but can be covered. So we look at contemporary border issues, some of those ones that are listed there, smuggling, laundering, etc., money laundering, and these are looked at in a global context of the 100% control versus the facilitation, full facilitation. What is the balance? What are the benefits of each aspect? Is it feasible to do 100%? And I do recall teaching some officers from Pakistan here a couple of years ago, and one officer mentioning that in the early days they looked at 100% of goods. And when I hear that people look at 100% of their goods, what it tells me is that they don't look at many of the importations in depth because it's physically impossible. But the administration implemented a strong risk management program, and they reduced their checking down to less than 5%, as I remember, and from that 5% targeted checking of the goods that were coming through both land and sea and air borders, they had an increase in the number of seizures through their regulatory controls. So there are ways of doing it, and many of you would be aware that risk management plays a huge part in this, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Topic 2 is people smuggling. This is a very big one around the world. There's 20 million or so displaced people at any given time, and of course it is a very difficult issue in relation to humanitarian aspects as well. We don't cover the humanitarian or moral aspects, and there are many certainly involved in the smuggling and trade of people, people trafficking as well as people smuggling. But we do have a look at the global trends. We talk about the methodologies of how people are smuggled, and we talk about the refugee conventions. We look at some of the protocols and the solutions that can be used to try and address this very difficult issue. And of course one of the primary solutions is the international cooperation. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but how do we develop international cooperation? How do we nurture it? And it does provide many of the solutions. And then on a practical basis we have a look at some of the operational enforcement considerations. And these vary depending on the environment. If we're talking about the sea environment, of course the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea will set out various laws in various jurisdictional zones. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But it's an area that myself and others here have had a lot of experience in, and we have some case studies, some less savoury than others, but they certainly have been many lessons that have been learnt. Topic 3, leadership and cooperative border control. Cooperative border control, I guess I use an example when I teach for border control and border management, that in my opinion there are 4 planks that can be utilised for effective and efficient border control. The first one is that it needs to be risk-based, secondly intelligence-led, and the third one is cooperation and coordination of agencies and countries, a very important aspect. And here we talk about how we engender and how we nurture and develop interagency cooperation and coordination. We look at the stakeholders that are involved in the local and global customs and other agency roles. And it's quite interesting, of course, in some countries the defence forces get involved in what I would call civil enforcement, as well as air defence enforcement as well. So it does present some quite interesting logistical issues. There are a number of formal and informal cooperative methods that can be utilised, methods of MOUs, etc., memorandum of understanding, and all sorts of interagency arrangements and what have you. And of course in some countries developed to the degree that it's legislated that there must be cooperation. and there are legal implications in some instances. I mean, basically, if you have officers from any agency undertaking an enforcement role, if they haven't got the legal power to do it, well, they are acting illegally. And there's many other aspects. And the last of those planks, whilst we're talking about that, is to do with operational efficiency, if you like, the right equipment, the right training, the right people. There's a number of different aspects of that. So we talk about strategies and different techniques to achieve cooperation. We utilise case studies where it's worked and where it hasn't worked. And in my opinion, leadership and the cooperative border control, particularly the cooperative border control aspect, is one of the primary solutions to or border control problems, if you like. International agreements affecting border agencies, the relationship between international and domestic law. I mentioned before the prosecution would take place under domestic law. Much of that is derived from international law. However, there are a number of traps involved in this as well, and in a number of countries I've worked in, the countries have signed on to the International Convention, and I'll use the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, as an example. They have signed on to the Convention, but then haven't ensconced the powers within into their domestic law. So in actual fact, they can't use those broader powers or prosecute people domestically if they haven't put it within their domestic law. And that's an issue. There are many of the conventions, and we won't go into them all, but certainly the revised Kyoto Convention that provides a lot of advice on simplification and standardisation of procedure in customs and border agency management is one that we primarily refer to. And there's many others, everything from the Chicago Convention right through to UNCLOS, as we've said, and the Vienna Convention. A lot of them, of course, are relating to cooperative arrangements, standardisation of procedures and cooperation. The World Customs Organisation and the World Trade Organisation are discussed. The United Nations agreements relating to those various considerations, drugs, weapons, endangered species, corruption, etc. And the diplomatic aspects of immunities from customs jurisdiction comes up as well. Topic 5 that we cover, and this is one that many people are interested in, of course, risk management and intelligence. And here we go through profiling and targeting. We give some examples of how profiling can be set up and how targeting works. But the key to all this, of course, good risk management is good intelligence as well, that the risk assessment is based on the operational and contemporary and fresh intelligence. Intelligence in itself, of course, is a large subject, and we go into some depth on the gathering of intelligence, and importantly how it can be developed into from information into intelligence and how it can be effectively disseminated. Topic 6, offshore enforcement, and I just put this photo in because we do talk about enforcement being both offshore and onshore, and here we have some pictures, and the larger picture on the right hand side relates to a vessel by the name of the Pong Su that had a couple of 100 kilos of heroin on board, and it was a North Korean registered vessel, and was one that the authorities at the time, and I was involved in this, didn't have the wherewithal to board the vessel when it was first sighted. So what is called a hot pursuit under Article 111 of the United Nations Convention of the Sea was undertaken and went on for some days. And there were many interesting lessons to be learnt from that in relation to the legal aspects, the enforcement aspects, and the cooperation amongst the agencies. Maritime enforcement, I've mentioned a couple of times as we've gone through. Maritime operations mentioned, and a number of case studies are utilised, but there is quite a concentration on the powers in the jurisdictional zones offshore. those zones of the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone, and the high seas, and what powers, limited powers, are available. We go into the principle of the fact that coastal states have quite extensive, or full extensive powers onshore, and through the territorial sea they also have full sovereign rights and full powers. But as you go further offshore, those powers diminish in a principle that we term segmented jurisdiction. Conversely, of course, as you start on the high seas and come back in, well, their powers increase. But each of the zones has different powers, and the one that we spend a bit of time on is the contiguous zone, that zone 12 to 24 nautical mile from the coastal baseline, and that is the area that has those four powers of customs, migration, fiscal and sanitary powers. And then beyond that into the EEZ for enforcement purposes, largely fisheries powers, and then beyond into the high seas. Transnational crime. Transnational crime is a large subject. We do actually run a separate concentrated unit on transnational crime, covering many things such as the money laundering, the financial trail, the cyber issues, and many of the other related, some of the security and terrorism type aspects. So this is a topic that we can cover in the short version or in the very long version if required. And again, there's a number of regulatory considerations there, and you'll see this common theme of both legal considerations and the cooperative considerations, if you like, throughout the whole unit, because these are seen as being particularly important. Border revenue. Some of you may recognise the photo on the left, the Treasury at Petra, one of the wonders of the world, a marvellous thing to see. But border revenue, again, as we said, if you want to crudely break down the role of customs in particular, and I had to limit it to two areas, one would be revenue and the other would be community protection. So here we have the revenue aspect, and we talk about the duties and the taxes that customs collects and the controls for those. We talk extensively about the harmonised system, the tariff, that both values the goods, that identifies the goods, gives them their classification, is used for statistical purposes, etc. And the other important aspect is the valuing of the goods. And of course that value of the goods varies from country to country. The considerations in Australia, it's FOB, a free on board aspect, but other countries use the CIF, Customs Insurance Freight type valuation consideration, and a number of the international overviews of that valuation and that tariff system. There's a brief mention of a couple of other aspects, important aspects of revenue, exchange rates, origin of goods, etc. But it is a big subject, and of course at higher levels, master's levels, etc., it has its own units that go into it in great depth. Health and quarantine is a big one. Quarantine threats, health quarantine, the law, CITES, the Convention about Endangered Species, which is a global issue, of course. Quarantine is a particularly important aspect, particularly in environments like Australia, where we have an island that doesn't suffer many of the quarantine problems that a number of other countries have had, such as foot and mouth and mad cow's disease, etc. And so the protection, and some would say, in the whole of the border control, when you consider such things as illicit drugs and people smuggling, etc., etc., the most important consideration is quarantine. Because when you have a quarantine issue, it can quickly cause huge health issues for the citizens, and of course cause huge industrial issues. Whereas if you had Newcastle's disease comes in and it wipes out the poultry industry, hundreds of thousands of jobs go, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in financial structure is put at risk. And of course there's cultural heritage issues and that trade of plant and animals. Illicit drugs. Illicit drugs is always quite a popular one. the drug conventions, the 3 drugs conventions culminating in the 1988 Vienna Convention. And one of our lecturers here, Professor Mark Harrison, actually played a part in framing the Vienna Convention. We talk about some of the cultivation and the production issues in relation to drugs, and we talk about the trafficking trends and the methods. Some of the identification issues are in there as well, and we have training aids such as our drug kit, and we look at ways of addressing these issues as well. Supply chain security. The last 2 topics are supply chain security and trade facilitation. Supply chain security, a number of people would be familiar with, and we spoke about the 2001 issue, and some of those points that are made there, the role of border agencies, and it does vary, the international and domestic responses, and we throw in everything from the framework of standards and the pillars, the customs to customs and customs to industry pillars, through to some of the initiatives that have been put in by the Americans and others, the Container Security Initiative, and some of those other aspects that are considered as well. And the last topic that we go through is trade facilitation. This one, of course, is particularly important to industry, and many countries, it's quite interesting to see, if you have a look at their aims and objectives, if you like, for the agency in recent years have included the customs type agencies. Many now have trade facilitation in there because it's such an important aspect for industry, and of course industry would say one of the greatest hurdles to trade facilitation are the customs regulatory aspects. And I do recall actually talking to someone in a country, Jordan it was from memory, and the gentleman told me that in the 1990s their clearance certificate for goods required 32 different signatures, and now with the single window operation running they require 2 signatures. So I'd suggest that would be a bit more efficient. Okay, thanks Lily. One more thing I will say, of course, about trade facilitation and supply chain security, and this is largely the assessment aspect of it, is where is that balance? You certainly need security, you certainly need trade facilitation. Where is the balance and what is the balance? And it's probably an opportune time to mention that certainly we would never say that one size fits all, and really it's a consideration that needs to be considered in terms of a local environment. So the individual ways that individual agencies and countries manage their trade facilitation and their supply chain aspects really is up to them, but certainly that one size doesn't fit all aspect that Sparrow sets out in his book on regulatory craft is very relevant, and balances can be achieved, and those are generally by utilising such processes as extended use of risk management and operational intelligence and profiling, targeting, and some of those other considerations. The course that we run as an undergraduate course also has an examination in it. Now, whenever these courses are conducted, it needs to be decided with the local sponsors, if you like, as to how that course is going to be assessed. And there are various modes of doing this. It can be assignments, it can be syndicate work, it can be a written examination. In the instance that I'm putting forward here as an example, it would be a couple of 20 mark assignments would be required to be completed. 20% participation mark would be allowed for tutorial activities, and a 40 mark written examination at the completion of the course. Now keep in mind this is over a whole semester. When this course is conducted in vocational course or workshop mode and it needs to be assessed, well, more likely will be a short paper to be written at the end, or a syndicate presentation. And what we try and do largely is pick those aspects of interest to that agency and get the syndicate groups to identify areas within their agency or their country that needs addressing, and then use the information that's been imparted to them during the week, as facilitated by the lecturers, to come up with a presentation at the end of the week that would provide some solutions to their issues. And normally what we would do when we provide these courses in country is that we would invite the senior management from the agency to come and listen to these presentations at the end. So everybody's very happy that they have to do a presentation at the end, until we tell them, of course, the management's coming. And then you find the work ethic increases significantly when the boss is watching. But it certainly does provide a greater impact. And one other mode that we use for this sort of training, and most of the training we do, is what's termed a skills project. And this is at the higher level, but I find this particularly effective, where the participants have to basically get an agreement with their organisation of an initiative that they will implement within the workplace that they can certainly frame around the information and the skills they've learnt during the course. And that becomes a very practical input thing for their agency, rather than the old thing of the training course where we rock up and we have sit down for a week and listen to someone get the folder and it goes up on the shelf and that's the end of it. So we're always looking at these ways of making it more valued for the agencies. And the last slide that we'll mention here before we open it up to a few questions is, as mentioned, there's a wide variety of subject issues, and there's about 30 odd. We've gone through a dozen or so here. And there may be others that are of particular interest to your agency or your environment that we haven't covered. We tailor these to the local environment. The presentation of these courses is as required by the agency or the country required. I mean, some people, of course, prefer it to be conducted online. Some people prefer it face-to-face. Some people like to do it as a one-week course or a two-week course. Some people like it to be pick out a couple of items of particular interest and do it as a very sort of short course. So we are, of course, interested in receiving feedback from yourselves as how useful you would find this sort of training, if it would be of any use to you, and how it would be conducted that would be of benefit to your administration, how it would or could be presented. And if you, on reflection of what we've discussed tonight, you find this topic or aspects of this topic of interest to yourselves or your agency, we're more than happy to, if you contact Lily in particular, we can have a look at the situation and work out a solution. So that's just a small taste of a very big subject, and if anyone would like to ask some questions, we are limited a little bit by time and we don't want to get too technical, but certainly with those subjects that I outlined before, I'd probably present half of them, but I don't present to be an expert in all of them, but we do have, of course, subject experts, and if I can't answer the question and you wish to email me a question and we can provide a response, we're certainly happy to do that.
Okay, thanks Andy. So we do have time for questions. Okay, so we have had a question from Sapanya in Cambodia. He says he was having some internet troubles throughout the presentation, so missed some slides. So he's asked if we can send him a copy of the presentation, and we absolutely can, Sapanya. We will send that out to you and to everyone else who attended tonight. Okay, so we have had a number of questions pop up, so I will read out the first one. It's from Sapanya, again in Cambodia. Now, Sapanya, yes, Sapanya's question was, are these webinars available to the public? And yes, the International Trade and Border webinar series that we've launched tonight with the first one is available to the public. So yes, anyone can register. Please feel free to forward on the registration link. The next question comes from Alistair Gall. Now, I'll unmute his microphone in a second. His question is, do you tailor the courses or studies depending on the level of experience of the participants? And do you recommend any minimum level of knowledge or experience before participating? And I'll hand this one over to Andy to answer.
Thanks, Lily, and thanks, Alistair. Look, the answer to that, it's an interesting question because we do get various levels of experience, but it really depends on the target audience. Quite often, for instance, if we're doing an undergraduate program here, we will have people who have very little experience of border control. So we will start it off at a basic level and then work our way through. At the other extreme, we've conducted this form of process in different countries with the senior executive of their customs agency with a view to them identifying the risk or risks that they are addressing, if you like, or would like to address, and how we can solve those risks. Now, part of that, in actual fact, is even being an earlier training of those executive officers in the risk management process, so then they can come up with those risks and we can have a look at it, addressing them. So it can be tailored to whichever group is required.
Okay, thanks, Andy. We have, just had a comment from G. Shivarakrishnan, just saying thank you for the webinars and keep them coming, and thank you. Yes, we will. We plan to. We are getting a good response for them. And another question about getting the material. Yes, we will be sending that out to everyone who attended today. So I think we've gotten all the questions that we will receive today, because I think Andy has actually answered a lot of the questions that you guys asked in the presentation when you signed up for it. So in that, I will just thank Andy for a very informative presentation, and also thank you to everyone who joined us today from wherever you are in the world. I hope you found it as useful as I did. Please take the time to complete the online survey that I'll be sending you shortly. It is very important to us. We do very strongly value your opinion. As Andy said, we do, if your organisation is interested in a tailored course, then please send an email to me with your inquiry so that we can start discussions. Here at CCES, we're always willing to discuss opportunities to tailor programs to meet the specific operational requirements of your organisation. Thanks again for coming, and we hope to see you again at our next free webinar in our International Trade and Border Management webinar series. The next one is Topic 2, Intelligence in the Border Agency Context, presented by Senior Lecturer John Howard on the 22nd of August. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again.